Imagine getting off the train at the most famous theme park in Florida. It is over 90 degrees, the air is heavy and wet, and you brace yourself. You are waiting to feel that familiar bite on your arm or hear that annoying buzzing near your head. You expect an itchy bump to pop up on your skin, but it never happens. You can wander through dozens of acres of Central Florida swamps, completely surrounded by standing water without getting a single mosquito bite. That is not by chance. And it is certainly not magic. What you are experiencing is a brilliant system that the park's founder quietly took from a group of people most of us just drive right past without looking twice. The engineers who set this up managed to keep the operating costs down to mere pennies per acre each week. Yet, the company has never mentioned it in any of their travel brochures. I spent a couple of summers sitting on a country porch in Ohio, watching an Amish grandmother achieve that exact same bug-free result using an old coffee tin and less than 50 cents. Before we finish here, I am going to share the old 1965 planning document that kicked this whole thing off. Plus, I will show you exactly how to use these exact same methods in your own yard this very weekend. You will not need to hire anyone, pull any permits, or buy toxic chemicals. First, we need to clear up the biggest mistake people make when it comes to dealing with mosquitoes. Everyone assumes the answer is spraying yard chemicals. They think the solution is lighting strong-smelling candles or hanging up those loud electric bug zappers that snap and pop on the back deck. But here's the real truth. Just about every mosquito you have ever slapped at a family cookout was hatched less than 150 feet from where you were standing. They simply do not migrate. They do not travel far. A female mosquito will spend her whole life inside an area smaller than a neighborhood baseball field. This means if you get rid of the water she uses to breed inside that specific zone, you get rid of the mosquito entirely. You do not just thin them out, you completely erase them. The theme park folks realized this long before they ever opened their gates back in the early 70s. They brought in a retired military engineer named Joe Potter. When he arrived, he carried a special manual from 1947 written by the Tennessee Valley Authority. That guidebook laid out step by step how the southern states had completely wiped out malaria without spraying a single drop of harsh chemicals on anyone's home. The method had a specific name. They called it source reduction. The main idea was actually something this engineer noticed decades earlier while visiting farm country in Pennsylvania during the 1930s. He saw how Amish families handled pools of water on their land using nothing more than a slight slope, some gravel, and a very specific type of plant. There were no bug sprays, no power cords, and no expensive experts. Potter took those old farming secrets straight to Florida, and he used them across all 43 square miles of the new park. Every single ditch, pond, and drain was built at a very careful angle. Inside the company, they call it the 4% rule. The water is never allowed to sit still long enough for mosquito eggs to hatch, which usually takes about a week to 10 days depending on how hot it is. The water is always slowly, but constantly flowing, so the eggs are carried away long before they can turn into biting bugs. But just keeping the water moving is only half the battle, and this is where the Amish secret truly shines. It is also the part the theme park never talks about. Potter added thousands of water hyacinths and special mosquito ferns into every single pond and lake on the property. These happen to be the exact same plants Amish farmers in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania have tossed into their animal water troughs and rain barrels for well over a century. This little fern grows a natural substance that creates a thick, bright green blanket across the surface of the water. Because this layer is so dense, mosquitoes absolutely cannot lay their eggs through it. They physically cannot pierce the mat to reach the water underneath. Researchers at a major university even studied this back in the late 70s and documented their findings. They found it wiped out 96% of the bugs. So, that brings up a really good question. Why hasn't anyone ever taught you this? Why do all the big hardware stores push you to buy a $40 can of poison that ends up killing the good bugs, like butterflies and bees, when a simple floating plant fixes the issue for good? The reason is the exact same answer I find every single time I dig into these old school tricks. Someone is getting rich off your bug spray. Someone is making a huge profit selling those noisy blue zappers. And someone is cashing in on that monthly service truck that parks in your driveway. Absolutely nobody is getting rich off a tiny fern that grows wild and doubles in size every few days in a cheap plastic pool filled with rainwater. Let me share the first time I actually witnessed this in person. I was relaxing on a wooden deck just outside Charm, Ohio, during a scorching July day in 2019. The thermometer was sitting at 91 degrees. Out back there was a pond roughly a quarter of an acre in size, vibrant and green, with 3 kids running around barefoot right beside the water. I turned to the owner, a man named Eli Mast, and asked him how he dealt with the mosquitoes. He stared at me as if I had just asked him if he kept dragons. He simply pointed toward the water. That entire pond was blanketed in a bright emerald layer. He explained that his grandpa got the very first handful of that plant from a local farmer way back in 1894. His family has kept a small bit of it alive in coffee tins every winter and tossed it back into the pond each spring for well over a century. The price to keep this going was absolutely zero. The initial cost was whatever the guy next door wanted for a scoop, which was usually just a loaf of bread or some homemade jam. Now, if you are a homeowner sitting there thinking this trick only works if you have a massive estate or a private lake, stick around because this next step is meant exactly for you. You do not have to own a pond. You do not need massive acres of land, and you certainly do not have to ask anyone for permission. All you have to do is take a stroll around your yard this weekend and track down anything that holds standing water. That sluggish rain gutter, the tray under your potted plants, the toy wagon the kids left out, that dip in the lawn that stays soggy after it rains, the old bird bath, or the tarp thrown over your firewood. Every single one of those spots is a perfect nursery for these pests. And over 90% of the bugs that bite you this season will come right out of those exact containers, all within 150 feet of your back door. The way the Amish tackle these spots is incredibly easy and practically free. For any puddle or container you cannot just dump out, you toss in a mosquito dunk. These are little round, donut-looking tablets that you can grab at any tractor supply or farm shop for about $1 a piece. They hold a specific type of bacteria known as BTI. It was originally found in a stagnant desert pool over in Israel back in 1976. This bacteria targets mosquito larvae and absolutely nothing else. It is completely safe for birds, fish, the family dog, your kids, and the helpful bugs in your garden. Just one of these little rings takes care of 100 square feet of water for an entire month. A standard family of 4 can shield their whole property for the entire summer for around $12. But here is the secret the label on the box will never mention, something I picked up from a wise older gentleman in Berlin, Ohio. You actually need to snap that tablet into 4 pieces before using it. You just drop 1/4 into each small container. Those full-sized rings were made to treat massive horse troughs, and most normal backyards do not have anything near that size. So a single pack of 6 rings properly snapped into pieces will actually treat 24 different spots. That is more than enough for a typical half-acre lot. For most households, a single box will easily last 2 full summers. So you can see how this all connects. The famous theme park creators did not actually invent a single thing. They just gave a clever engineer a paycheck to read an old manual from 1947 and combine an 18th century Amish farming trick with modern landscaping. The entire strategy comes down to 3 basic rules. Keep the water moving when you can. Blanket the still water with those floating ferns, and treat the smaller spots with BTI. That is really it. That is the whole grand secret to keeping a massive 43-acre swamp entirely free of bloodsuckers. However, there is one final puzzle piece. This is the part I saved for last because discovering it completely shifted my perspective. It is a brilliant strategy I uncovered tucked away in a single paragraph of an old planning document from October of 1965, prepared for the park's founder. That specific paper was his personal blueprint for the Florida project. Bits and pieces of it have leaked out over the decades, but this one specific detail never made it into any normal guidebooks. I stumbled across it while reading a forgotten thesis paper written by a history grad student back in 2003. This section detailed something the head engineer referred to as the perimeter trench. It was a very shallow groove, roughly 1.5 feet wide and only 6 inches deep, dug around the border of all the main guest areas. They filled this groove with a base of crushed oyster shells and sprinkled a light coating of standard garden lime on top. Then, every couple of weeks while the bugs were active, a worker would walk that line with a watering can, soaking the mixture with diluted apple cider vinegar. This combination creates a very subtle, slow-releasing vapor of acetic acid that mosquitoes simply cannot fly through. It basically threw up an invisible shield around the whole property. The engineer originally learned this trick from an Amish blacksmith up in Lancaster County. This blacksmith had been using the exact same barrier around his workshop and his family's outdoor dining area since the late 1940s. He got the idea from his dad, who picked it up during the terrible sickness outbreaks of the 1890s. Back then, farming communities dug these lime-filled trenches around their spring houses to keep swarms of flies and pests off the dairy. This trick was handed down quietly through 4 generations before a theme park executive finally noticed it and carried it down south. You can set this up at your own house this coming weekend. The supplies will run you less than $15 in total. You just need a bag of crushed oyster shells, which any farm supply store sells as chicken grit for about $6 for a 40-pound sack. You also need a bag of garden lime, which is roughly $4 at your local hardware store. Grab a gallon jug of apple cider vinegar for another $3, a flat shovel, and a free afternoon. You dig a shallow, 6-inch groove around the spaces you actually spend time in. Do not worry about outlining your entire yard. Just frame the back patio, the wooden deck, or the porch where you like to sit after dinner. You pour in about 2 inches of those crushed oyster shells, Next, dust a thin layer of garden lime over the shells, maybe 1/4 of an inch thick. Then, once every 2 weeks, you pour 1 cup of the apple cider vinegar into a standard watering can filled with a gallon of water, and you simply stroll along the line, watering it just like you would a flower bed. That is the whole trick. It is completely invisible. To anyone else, it just looks like a neat little gravel border. Your neighbors will assume you are just fixing up your landscaping. But in reality, you are constructing the exact same invisible shield that has kept the busiest tourist spot on the planet free of mosquitoes for over half a century. This little border actually does something else that nobody talks about. Over time, those oyster shells slowly leak calcium carbonate down into the dirt, which balances your soil and helps water drain much faster. Meanwhile, the lime destroys the moss and mildew that likes to grow along the base of your home. Give it 3 or 4 years, and the ground inside that border actually gets drier, healthier, and much better for your home's structural foundation. You are not simply blocking bugs. You are secretly upgrading your land, just like how that old blacksmith kept his workshop dry and solid for 40 years, while the guys next door battled constant wood rot and insects. I think about this every single time I see one of those pest control trucks driving through my subdivision. The guy who owns the house is shelling out $65 a month. That is nearly $800 every year for a toxic cloud that wipes out every good pollinating bug in the yard and only works for about 2 weeks before they have to spray again. That exact same homeowner could invest $15 on a Saturday and completely end his mosquito issue forever. But he has no idea. No one ever told him. The information has always been there. That old 1947 government manual existed. The 1965 theme park report existed. Amish farmers up in Ohio and Pennsylvania have been doing this since before the Civil War. Yet somehow, living in a society with the most access to information in the history of the world, your average guy with a mortgage has never heard a word of it. That is the thing that really gets under my skin. It is not that these secrets were lost to time. They were perfectly preserved by people who simply refused to let them go. They were just hidden from the rest of us because you cannot make a huge profit off sharing them. The park engineer used it because his boss paid him to. The Amish kept it because their grandfathers passed it down. And the rest of the country was told to just buy another can of bug spray. You just got back something that was stolen from you. You can finally enjoy a warm evening outside without the constant slapping, the buzzing, and the itchy welts. You get a backyard where your grandkids can run around barefoot in the grass, just like kids did back in 1894, and just like they still do behind that old farmhouse out in Ohio. If you are the type of person who understands that real practical knowledge gets buried just to protect a big company's monthly profits, then you already know what to do next. Let me know down in the comments. Are you going to dig that border around your deck, or are you starting with those floating ferns in your rain barrels? I really want to know which method you are trying out this weekend. Drop a comment below. I know this crowd does not speak up unless I ask, so I am asking directly. Tell me your plan, and let me know what state you live in, because I want to track how this holds up across different weather zones. Hit subscribe if you want to keep reclaiming these forgotten skills. Next time, I'm going to walk you through an old Amish trick for keeping a basement completely dry during a massive storm, using nothing more than a 5-gallon bucket of a cheap powder you can get at a farm store for under $9. The guy who taught it to me has been in the exact same stone house since 1962, and his basement floor has never seen a single drop of water. I will catch you in that video, but before you click away, I need to hand you a few extra pieces of the puzzle. What I have given you so far is just the groundwork. It is the skeleton of the whole method. And if you stop at the basics, you will definitely see an improvement, but you will not achieve the kind of success that makes the guy next door lean over the property line to ask for your secret. You want the kind of results that make your spouse completely ignore that toxic bug spray on the patio table because there hasn't been a mosquito in sight for almost a month. So let's cover the rest. I am going to share the extra layers those engineers stacked on top of the border trench, the floating plants, and the moving water. Because that famous theme park does not lean on just one single tactic. It uses a combination of very small, cheap, and silent tricks that all work together. When you combine them, the odds are stacked so heavily against the female mosquito that she cannot find water to breed in, a shady spot to rest, a person to bite, or even a path back home. The second tactic is moving air. Think about this for a second. The standard backyard mosquito that transmits all the stuff you want to avoid simply cannot fly if the breeze is blowing harder than 1 mile per hour. Just 1 mile an hour. That is barely a whisper of air. It is the sort of breeze you would hardly feel on your skin. The park engineers realized this back in 1972, and they started hiding fans all over the places where people stand in line or eat outside. They disguised them as cooling misters, light poles, and park decorations. Every single one is pushing air across the exact spots where visitors stand still. A stationary person is an easy meal, but a moving current of air acts like a brick wall a bug cannot pass through. You can set this up on your deck for less than $40. Just grab a basic outdoor oscillating fan from any home improvement store and set it down by your feet. It will keep a 12-foot circle completely clear around your chairs. Keeping it low is crucial, because that is exactly where these pests hunt. They do not buzz right into your face like a common fly. They fly low to the ground, tracking the carbon dioxide coming off your body, and aim right for your ankles and calves. If you stick a fan on a tabletop aiming at your head, you are guarding the wrong airspace. Set it on the deck planks, aim it across the ground, and just wait and see. The Amish actually pull off this exact same trick, just by building their porches to catch the natural evening breeze blowing across the crops. Every single historic farmhouse out in that Ohio county has its front porch pointing southwest for this exact purpose. The older generation will tell you their granddads chose where to build the house based on the summer winds in July, not the winter sunrise. The third layer involves scent, and this is where practically everybody gets it backwards because we have been sold a lie for 4 decades that citronella is the magic cure. Citronella does not work. It was just a clever ad campaign dreamed up in the 1940s by a candle business that needed to sell off stock after the war. The plants that actually drive bugs away, the ones the park's landscaping crew plants by the truckload, are lemongrass, which is actually the much stronger parent plant of citronella, rosemary, which lets off strong oils when the hot afternoon sun hits it, and a short, creeping herb known as pennyroyal. The Amish ladies always plant a thick ring of pennyroyal right around their chicken coops and kitchen gardens. You can grab a starter pot of it for about $2 at any local greenhouse. It spreads like crazy on its own. By your second year, you will have a thick rug of it and you will never have to touch it again. Then there is the fourth piece of the puzzle. This is the one those massive entertainment companies keep under the tightest lock and key because it sounds almost too ridiculous to be true. Every morning between 4 and 6, the grounds crew walks the entire property wearing backpack sprayers filled with a mix of water and garlic juice. It is just heavily concentrated garlic extract, mixed at 1 ounce per gallon of water, misted lightly under the bushes, into the flower beds, and along the shady walls of the buildings. The specific chemical that gives garlic its strong smell is called allicin. Mosquitoes can smell it in incredibly tiny amounts, and they absolutely refuse to breed anywhere near it. Just one spray lasts for about 3 weeks before it needs to be done again. You can buy a gallon jug of heavy-duty food-grade garlic juice from a restaurant supplier for roughly $14, and it will cover a quarter-acre yard for the whole summer season. I picked this up from a retired groundskeeper named Raymond, who worked at the park from the late 80s all the way to 2004. He mentioned they called that early morning routine the breakfast shift, because for about 20 minutes as the sun came up, the whole place smelled like an Italian restaurant. Then, the scent would fade away to the point where the human nose could not detect it, but the bugs would smell it clearly for the next 21 days. Raymond is retired now. He lives out near Ocala, and his property has not seen a mosquito issue since he started doing this at his own house in 1991. He walked me out to his garage and showed me 4 big jugs of that garlic concentrate sitting against the wall, enough to keep him bug-free for 3 more summers. He spent $56 for the whole stash. Now, we need to talk about what happens if you ignore all this, because people really underestimate the stakes. The federal health agencies noted that back in 2023, there were over 2,000 cases of West Nile caught right here at home, and experts think the real number is probably 10 times that amount since it usually just feels like a mild flu and no one gets tested. We also saw the very first cases of locally caught malaria in the states in 2 decades, popping up in Florida, Texas, and Maryland. Dengue fever, which used to just be a tropical vacation problem, is now showing up in backyards in California and Arizona. The mosquito is not just the harmless little nuisance she was when you were a kid. She is pushing further north and bringing worse problems with her. On top of that, the chemical foggers that did the job back in the 90s are failing today because these bugs have built up an immunity to the main poisons in over a dozen states. The Amish completely avoid this issue. If you ask a country doctor treating those communities how many West Nile patients he has seen, the answer will be 0. It is not because they have magic immune systems. It is because they ripped out the breeding zones from their farms 3 generations ago and simply never let them return. They do not have blocked gutters. They do not have stagnant bird baths. They do not leave plastic kiddie pools full of old rainwater sitting in the sun in August. Any standing water on their property is either actively being used or it gets dumped out before dark. It is a daily habit, not something you buy in a bottle. And here is where I need to shoot straight with you, because I do not want angry comments next month saying this trick failed. The border trick, the ferns, moving the water, the breeze, the strong herbs, and the garlic. All of these combined will wipe out roughly 90 to 95% of the bugs in a standard neighborhood yard. That is exactly what those engineers pulled off in Florida, and it is what you can pull off at your house. However, you cannot control your neighbor's bad habits. If the guy over the fence has a neglected swimming pool, or the lady down the street has a clogged drain she hasn't cleaned in years, a few bugs will wander over. The way you deal with those wanderers is that invisible barrier. You just make your yard the absolute worst place on the block to hang out, and the female will fly right past your house to find an easier meal a few doors down. The old farmers always say you do not need to run faster than the bear, you just need to run faster than the other guy. That exact logic applies here. You don't need a totally impenetrable fortress. You just need your yard to be less appealing than the other houses in a 300-foot flight radius. Every single tactic I just broke down costs less than one visit from those professional spraying trucks. Those services charge about $89 a trip, showing up 8 to 12 times a summer. You are looking at $700 to $1,000 every single year, forever, getting worse results every season as the local bugs get immune to the spray. Compare that to a $1 fern, $14 of garlic, a $2 herb, a $40 fan, and an afternoon doing some light digging around your deck. That is your whole investment. That is the grand secret, and it has been hiding in plain sight at the most photographed tourist destination in the country for over half a century. All while the rest of us were fed a story that the only way to sit outside in July was to coat our kids in military-grade jungle chemicals. The park founder knew it, the Amish knew it, and now you know it.